see if you listen to this.
I think, hell yeah, I stuck to it. But you've got to do it properly. And I was being asked to do something improper, and I wouldn't do it. And I think things like that have been done before. So maybe the president thought he was just doing what others have done, but anyway, not with me.
The lesson for students is that our Constitution is strong. This is then a section on dirty tricks and political espionage that lays the foundation for understanding the what would become Gemstone, the operation that included the break-in at the Watergate, the headquarters of the Democratic National Committee in Watergate. The materials lay out other kinds of dirty tricks, and then the most famous one. Again, in this case, you can listen to Tom Charles Houston talk about dirty tricks in 1970. You can talk about the president ordering the investigation of Senator Kennedy by the Teamsters. You can hear the president ordering a covert Kennedy write-in campaign that violated postal laws in New Hampshire. You can hear G. Gordon Liddy talk about how he developed the Gemstone espionage plan. You can hear John Mitchell actually confirming some of what Gordon Liddy said about the elements of that plan. You can hear Charles Colson in November '71 reminding the president of E. Howard Hunt and what the Cubans were up to. So again, we use the oral histories to substantiate the tapes to substantiate the claims that we express in these panels. The fact that the president knew about the dirty tricks operation when it was set up in the spring of 1971 is clear from a very long but very interesting conversation between Haldeman and the president about dirty tricks that we've included. We also explain what we don't know for sure, because this is not just an exhibit about settled conclusions. There are things that remain unknown, and we have this panel about what the White House knew. Some of these documents we released only in the last few years, which show the relationship between Haldeman, who was the president's chief of staff, and the decision to hire Liddy and to empower him to undertake a large political espionage campaign. But there are still questions about what people really knew about what Liddy planned to do. I'm talking about what Haldeman really knew and what the president himself really knew. So we're very straightforward about what can be proven, and we're also straightforward about what we don't know. That doesn't mean that shows you that learning about Watergate won't end, but this is designed with flexibility, as I will show you as we walk around, so that as new material comes out, we can expand the information. So one would hope that over time, this would be the first place you'd come to see the latest, the edge, the frontier of the work on Watergate and its significance. Here we have a panel on the cover-up, and this explains, after the second Watergate break-in, which goes awry, when the 5 burglars are arrested and the 2 conspirators, Liddy and Hunt, flee the scene, what is the cover-up? How does it evolve? Here we use tapes to bring you through the evolution of the cover-up and the president's role. It's not simply the smoking gun tape, it's a number of different tapes. And here, again, if you don't want to listen to the tapes, you can follow the story here, panel by panel. As the White House is attempting what they call different scenarios to try to answer all the evidence that the FBI and the press have acquired. Again, we use these panels to give you background as if you had to do Wikipedia. You know, people will see the name Haldeman. Well, who is he? You have biographies of all the major players over the course of this timeline, and they appear where their biography appears where they are important or most important in the story. Well, the cover-up works for a time, and then it begins to unravel. And this panel is about the role that the press and the courts, and ultimately the Senate, played in unraveling the cover-up. From the indictments, when it was clear to Judge Sirica that somebody was lying in his court, bless you, through the first Watergate trial, when the judge decides to delay sentencing, hoping that he can pressure one of the burglars to break his silence and talk about the higher-ups who must have been involved. Then the breaking of the silence by the one burglar, McCord, just at about the same time, a little bit before that, when John Dean goes and visits the president and warns him that it's getting much more expensive to keep people quiet. And then, of course, John Dean's important testimony before the Senate Watergate Committee. Here, Bob Woodward, we have Bob Woodward talking about Mark Felt and the role that he played in the investigation. We have, of course, excerpts from the Council on the Presidency, conversation, particularly the "You Could Get $1 Million," which was for Judge Sirica and later Special Prosecutor Leon Jaworski, when he would hear it later on, was really the moment that they realized the president was involved in the cover-up. Here, Judge Sirica is no longer with us, but we were able to interview his law clerk, who recalls what it was like to hear that conversation.
March 21st, second conversation.
That was a memorable day when we sat down and listened to that particular tape. We did not expect to hear, frankly, what we heard. John Dean came in, and much as he testified, the Senate stuff kind of laid out all of what was going on. President Nixon approved these initial steps.
So, again, and then you can watch some of the Senate Watergate Committee hearing. The famous "What did the President know? When did he know it?" Discussion or exchange between Howard Baker and John Dean.
I'm not trying to attack your testimony, but rather to organize it for our own committee purposes.
And here, actually very interesting, a man who was the acting FBI director at the time.
I was in charge of the Civil Disturbance Unit in
William Ruckelshaus.
Of the anti-Vietnam War demonstrations in the Nixon administration. And Dean was a negotiator with the new mobilization from a lot of the anti-war groups. And we worked together quite closely. I knew Dean's strengths and weaknesses, and he knew mine. But in watching him testify, I was convinced that at least he thought what he was saying was as accurate as he could make it. That was one thing that made me really wonder how deep was the president involved. There was a number of other things that were coming in. There were daily reports as a result of investigations that had been started by Cox, where the investigators would make a memorandum, give it to Cox, give me a copy. And it was when Cox understood that I would receive a copy of those things. So I would be getting every day a lot of evidence that had to do with various people in the White House and their involvement in this activity, a lot of which was stuff coming out in the grand jury. And I just concluded as a result of the accumulation of stuff I'd read, my own knowledge of personalities of the people involved, that there was a lot more involvement on the part of the White House, and indeed the president himself, than had yet come out.
And it wasn't going to come out until a very dramatic moment when a man named Alexander Butterfield testifies.
Butterfield, are you aware of the installation of any listening devices in the Oval Office of the President?
Quiet.
I was aware of listening devices. Yes, sir. When were those devices placed in the Oval Office? Approximately the summer of 1970. I cannot begin to recall the precise date. My guess, Mr. Thompson, is that the installation was made between, and this is a very rough guess, April or May of 1970 and perhaps the end of the summer or early fall of 1970.
Yeah, what I really done was answer a direct question honestly. That's really all I did. But there are very few people who see it that way. I can tell you that. If you do something that does not reflect well on the President of the United States, you lose a lot of friends in a hurry. That's I understand Washington. I know Washington. And that's the way it is. And I was a dead man right away.
This section talks about the role of the tapes, how the tapes would really bring the end of the administration as they were released thanks to the decision by the U.S. Supreme Court. I thought I'd let you listen to Alexander Haig talking about what he thought of the tapes.
I think not burning the tapes was the biggest mistake he ever made.
You had recommended that he burn the tapes, but then in inner circles you also say that had he made that decision and actually burned the tapes, then you would have been wrong.
No, what I said was that he asked me to burn the tape. He said, would you be willing to do it? And I said, no. I said, get someone who is not going to be held accountable substantively for what he did. Get Manola. Get somebody who had no reputation for responsibility as far.
So he asked you hypothetically at some point? So the President asked you hypothetically at some point whether you would be willing to destroy the tapes?
Yeah.
Was this when he was in the hospital?
I said, I can't do that. I said, I can't put my family in that position. I won't do it.
This was when he was in the hospital?
Yeah. And then I made no headway. He said, Al, I think I'm going to take my chances with the tape.
And you can hear Senator Trent Lott's reaction. He was then in the House Judiciary Committee. His reaction when he read the transcript of what became known as the smoking gun tape, which revealed the President's order in June of '72 that the CIA should be used to obstruct the FBI's investigation of the cover-up, of the Watergate break-in.
I remember, I got a call I'll never forget now from a Mississippian who was working at the White House, and I was in Destin, Florida, on vacation with my family, and he said, this is something I think you should read. And I think he maybe even described it as a smoking gun. And so I got on a plane, flew back in. He met me at the Baltimore airport, so I had to get in late at night. And I actually read it in my car light on the way back to Washington. It was obviously now, at that point, that one article of impeachment for obstruction of justice was going to be on the wall. So I basically acknowledged that I would support that one article of impeachment.
And then Justice Breyer, who was then part of the Watergate Special Prosecution Force consultant, talks to us about why U.S. v. Nixon was decided by unanimous court in the way that it was.
At that era, what did it teach us about executive privilege?
Well, there is an executive privilege. It's like all other privileges, like Holmes said that. He said that you have a principle of law, and at some point it runs into a contrary principle. The further you get away from its purpose, the more likely it is to find a contrary principle that defeats it. So executive privilege is a necessary and important part of the law to protect the confidentiality of the president's deliberations and getting advice from his own advisors. It was being used in that instance well beyond the heart of what it's there for. So it isn't surprising that the court said it doesn't protect these particular materials.
Now, when the visitor finishes the timeline, they then can go to the other side and look at certain aspects of the story in depth. If they're interested in the Supreme Court decision, there's a panel on the Watergate in the Supreme Court. If they want to see what the legislative legacy, what were the laws how did our country respond to the lessons of Watergate at the time? How did we deal with issues of privacy? With how you treat presidential records, for example. Those laws were all the product of lessons learned during the Watergate period, and they involved, in each one involved an attempt to correct the weaknesses in the system illustrated by the Watergate drama. So you have the legislative legacy of the Supreme Court. There is an exhibit on presidents and secret taping. President Nixon was not the first president to tape. Actually, Franklin Roosevelt was the first president to tape. His taping, however, was an ocean. If you look at it this way, President Nixon left us with an ocean. Lyndon Johnson left us with a lake. And John F. Kennedy left us with a swimming pool. President Nixon left us with around 3,700 hours of tape, which gives you an unprecedented audio diary of presidential decision-making in two extraordinarily dramatic years, 1971 through 73, of the Nixon presidency. Where those secret microphones were located, you can see on these little dioramas that Equan designed. And you, of course, may have heard of the 18.5-minute gap. A number of people haven't, and so we have an exhibit there on what the gap is, what efforts the National Archives has made to try to recover the lost conversation. And you can listen to the gap. And you can, in particular, we've designed the listening station so that you can hear all the audio clicks, the audible clicks, that the nonpartisan professional board determined were evidence of deliberate erasures. So that there are at least 5 to 8 deliberate erasures on this tape, thus making it unlikely that Rosemary Woods simply deleted the entire thing while stretching in an almost impossible way, reaching to get a telephone call while keeping her foot on the foot pedal of the tape machine. But you can hear those clicks for yourself, and you can hear where the intelligible conversation ends and where it resumes again after the 18.5 minutes. And we also have a little CSI activity for people who want to know more about the second break-in. We have some burglar tools. We have that were found on the men, that were evidence in the trial. We also have one of the listening devices that was introduced as evidence into the Watergate trial. And finally, right there, behind you, we have the Watergate Resource Center, and that is the huge interactive that includes 750 segments. Excuse me, and this is divided up into 31 chapters. Each one has an iMovie. You listen to it here, but let's say we take turbulent times. I always hit the. You have an iMovie, which introduces the section. In this case, we're setting you up by telling you about, again, for people who are 14, about Vietnam, about the issues involved, so that you can understand the Pentagon Papers issue. So what this is a Richard Nixon campaign ad from 1968, which talks about the importance of getting out of Vietnam, and then we've mashed it. It's a mashup. Within a moment, you'll see a protest that occurred in the East Room during a Ray Conniff singer's performance in January of 1972. Take a look at this one. You don't need. Look at what she's. You'll get it. You'll get it closer. This was for the president. Somebody came here. She said, "Stop the killing," and then she thanked God for Daniel Berrigan and Daniel Ellsberg, and was then ushered out. So then, what you do is you say that this section contains materials on the very close 68 campaign, and the debate over the Vietnam War. You can listen to Nixon administration officials talk about Cambodia and Kent State. You can listen to a phenomenal series of recollections of President Nixon's May 1970 late-night trip to the Lincoln Memorial. You can listen to both opponents and supporters of the war describing Vietnam at home. Morton Halperin talks about how he came to oppose the war. John Kerry talks about Dewey Canyon 3. Senator Kerry talks about the evolution of his thinking on Vietnam. Anthony Lake talks about how he came to oppose the war. And members of the deputy press secretary talks about how he viewed the anti-war movement, and 2 other members of White House staff explain why they didn't quite understand.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but you were going to have about the
Okay. In any case,
Can you take a question, Tim?
I'll take lots of questions. Anyway, there are lots. This is self. You can go around this yourself. But
it's not that I don't want to stop Tim, but we're going to have to let the public in so we can continue this tour. But it'll be noisier, and at some point maybe we'll move into the classroom, and then you can all have an opportunity to talk to him. It's just the public is going nuts out there.
Tim, you obviously put in several years of work organizing and collating and presenting these materials. Of the new interviews that you did and some of the material that perhaps hasn't been seen in public before, do you think you've come across anything that is going to significantly change our understanding of Watergate and what happened in terms of new information or perhaps something that sheds new light on what happened?
I think that there's a whole story. There's a whole story of people within the government who said no, that has been lost. And their story is now preserved. People who received orders that they could not implement. That is a story that must be remembered. That is something that we have to teach students, kids, and future members of our government. That you can't say no when you're asked to do something that is unconstitutional or illegal. I believe that narrative.
Wait, excuse me. I think that these kinds of questions are questions that Tim can easily answer in another round.
What I did primarily was to augment the exhibit and spend more time. We built out more walls on the left-hand side. One of the criticisms was that there wasn't enough of the president's voice, even though he's on tape all over the place, and we have speeches. But I decided, all right, what I'll do is, given that the students might know of the movie Frost Nixon, and that gives you a nice point of connection, why not have a section on President Nixon reflecting on Watergate afterwards? So that is they didn't ask for that, and they certainly didn't select the portions of it. But it was thinking through, well, have I missed something here? We also there were some issues about I'm not a lawyer, and so there was some interest in how I used the word subpoena. There were also some questions about when Magruder and John Dean sought clemency. So I went back and reviewed the files and had the assistance of our top people in the Watergate Special Prosecution Force archive to be absolutely certain that how I described their efforts to seek clemency, how that happened, why they didn't get it, what kind of immunity they wanted. So that stuff is actually really, 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 really tightly researched. My colleagues in Washington had a great idea. I have a section where the president is told, where there's this discussion of pardons for the Vietnam veterans against the war, the president is told that Hunt's being paid money. And again, we have the segment where the president is told, in fact, there's a little quote from it on the wall, where the president understands that Hunt's being paid to behave and to say nothing. It's not an issue of defense. It's an issue of, it's hush money. And I had that in it. But my colleagues in Washington said, you know what you should do? You should tell people more about what we know about the hush money and how much it was and all that. So there's a panel that I wrote. I went back, and with their help, I go to Washington. My friends know I go to Washington a lot. And there's now a panel on the payment to the burglars. And that was definitely a response to the Watergate panel's helpful review. And we put it in. So I think that this is it's a better and deeper and more comprehensive exhibit for the review. I didn't have to compromise my training as a historian, and that was very important.
You can put that up there. Well, you know how I saw the walls red?
I think that's a good reason.
Yeah, she enjoys it.
How many tapes have they put out to be?
Well, Mark George sent him that email. It's about 15 minutes.